A William Garden designed 85-foot motor sailor. Love to see that. Tonight's talk covers 3 months of summers in 1964, where we spent it in North Atlantic and the Baltic Seas, visiting and bordering countries including Poland and the Soviet Union. She lived in the East Coast for a quarter of a century. Her life has been filled with many interests, including working with professionals in the art and museum world. 15 years ago, my soul reminded me of Sausalito, and it was home. I came back and shortly thereafter became a member of the yacht club. Besides the friendships that have blossomed, I have enjoyed very much playing a little red piano over there, which we all see her playing. Please help me welcome
Thank you.
Thank you. An important part of this talk. Thank you very much, Marge, for the lovely introduction. And thank you all for coming tonight. Here we go. I'm looking for Laura, who's my right hand. Oh, thank you, lady. The final question. Here we are. Here we go. The final question Ken Jennings asked on a recent episode of Jeopardy TV show was, what is the name of the sea that separates Russia from Norway? 2 of the contestants answered the North Sea, and 1 answered the Bering Sea. The reason I'm bringing it up tonight will become apparent. Some of you may have been at the club last year when I spoke of the first leg of the Nereus circumnavigation in 1963. Beginning in San Francisco and traveling through the Bering Sea, the Pribilofs and the Aleutians on the way to Singapore took 6 months. Nereus would continue west to the Seychelles Islands, then a British colony, a stunning tropical paradise in the Indian Ocean, halfway around the world from San Francisco. Tonight's story is about a continuation of the trip my family shared on board Nereus in the summer of 1964. We traveled through the North Atlantic and the Baltic Seas and visited European ports located between 49 and 60 degrees northern latitude. Drawn from the anecdotes written in Mother's fruitful diary and Nereus log, letters, newspaper articles, and family memories, I begin this chapter in England. But first, the yacht and the cast of characters. The yacht, Nereus, was an 85-foot William Garden designed motor sailor. She did not have a computer navigation system, just a lot of paper charts and Loran Wood Freeman automatic pilot, Sperry radar, Bendix bathymeter, and a custom electronic ADF. Powered by a large turbocharged diesel Caterpillar engine and 2 generators, a fishing launch, and a sailing dinghy. The rig may be of interest. Besides a fore and aft mizzen, main and jib, the Garden design originally included a course and a raffee that appear in this photo. They were removed during the first leg of the trip. The crew, my father, Bill Pomeroy, was 47, the recently retired executive vice president of J.H. Pomeroy Company, passionate about family and boats and art. My mother, Peggy, was 45, a Southern belle with a passion for learning and a spirit of adventure. Wherever we were on our trip, in whatever port in the world, Mother encouraged us to come with her to explore historical sites or museums. If that was not enough, she might encourage us to look out for treasures in antique stores or join her seeking a rare, exotic mollusk that could only be found on pilings in Puget Sound. My dad believed this trip was important because as my brothers and I reached our 20s, He thought we would be leaving our family nest in Sausalito before long as we set out on our own adult lives. He encouraged us to invite friends to join our family on this leg of the trip. My two brothers and I invited Chris Cutter and our Sausalito neighbors, Mary Riley, who's here tonight with her family, and her brother Tom. We all were under the care of our crew, Fred Woodhull, engineer, Osama Yamashita, Sam, Sugoshi Iwashima, Roxanne, and Tang Tong, the cook. Nereus had ample accommodations, 3 double staterooms, a single, and a moving forecastle forward. Dad set rules and regulations and posted them on a large notice in the galley. The 12 of us on board were to read the notice and then initial our names to show that we had. We were to share a spirit of cooperation and were assigned specific jobs. My younger brother was in charge of electronics. My friend Mary was supposed to iron. And I was supposed to bake. We were all asked to comb our hair, have clean face and hands, pick up dirty clothes, and make our bunks, shape up or ship out. This chapter in England begins in England in June 1964. To set the stage, let's start with a little historical perspective. 1964 was the same year President Johnson asked Congress to increase military presence in Indochina. The World's Fair opened in New York City. The U.S. government stopped minting silver quarters. It was the year the Beatles first appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And on a lighter note, Pop-Tarts were officially launched as a popular breakfast treat. Nereus's voyage to London started off with a bang, literally. Departing Dartmouth to join the English Channel, Nereus found herself pitching heavily into a head sea. A submarine passed close and across the bow. Mother wrote in her diary she heard a big gun and saw smoke in the water. Then she added, quote, 5 British warships, bows headed in, circled us. Flashing signals were sent via light and radio, but we were not able to read them. Dad decided to take a chance, and Nereus sailed on. We learned shortly thereafter that the Royal Navy had been carrying out training exercises where civilian vessels were likely to be present. A pilot came on board at the entrance to the Thames River and took us to Wapping, a familiar place certainly for those who enjoy Charles Dickens stories or tales of captured pirates who met their demise at the execution dock. During our few days in London, we visited the Silver Walls, the Churchill War Museum, and Harrods. We even witnessed the changing of the guards at Buckingham Palace. Dad brought paper charts of the North Atlantic and Baltic Seas published by the British Admiralty. We have 3 of them here today. They had been providing nautical charts for more than 200 years. As it turns out, 1964 was the last year that Admiralty enjoyed the sole authorship of the charts because it was soon placed under the umbrella of the larger British Navy Command. As all sailors know, it is critical to have up-to-date and accurate charts that show the entrance to harbors, as well as the constantly changing seabed. It is important to verify the accuracy of a ship's compass. As London is just 7 miles from Greenwich, the primary meridian, where east meets west, halfway around the world from the international dateline, it was an excellent time to do just that. Watching the weather and understanding the tides in the English Channel is a full-time job. Tidal currents as strong as 13 knots have been recorded. Nereus departed the Thames estuary at midnight to experience 6 hours of heavy rolling. We tossed a message bottle overboard. While at sea, we had been tossing bottles overboard since the beginning of the trip. The bottles had a form inside noting the date and Nereus's latitude and longitude, asking if the bottle were found to please send the form completed with details as to where it was found to Dad's San Francisco address for a small reward. This particular bottle was found in the middle of August at a small bay in France, not far from Dunkirk. The questionnaire had been damaged by water that had leaked into the bottle, but it is still readable. Another bottle tossed a week later was found on a Dutch island by a German teenager at the end of August. As we approached the lowlands of Netherlands, we encountered the Broad 14s, named such because the channel consistently measures 14 fathoms deep. Busy traffic with ships of all sizes, but not all drafts. It is also an important fishing area. Of specific interest these days, it lies southeast of Dogger Bank, another fine fishing area that has been made into the largest wind farm in the world. The weather window continued to look dim. Big winds and a rough crossing required hand steering. Even though the automatic pilot had been repaired in London, Dad wanted to be especially careful. Here's an example of some of the modern technology we had in the 1960s. We entered the first locks at the IJmuiden Canal and cleared the Amsterdam Bridge and celebrated the 4th of July, flying the American flag off the stern. Dad set up his barbecue on the fantail and cooked large steaks for all of us on board. Total engine time from Singapore, where we had celebrated Christmas, to the capital of the Netherlands was 2,608 hours. When I think of Holland, tulips and windmills and wooden shoes come to mind. A country 1/10 the size of California, it has an elaborate system of pumping station, dikes, and locks that protect the lowlands from the encroaching sea. Nereus cruised through the IJsselmeer and the Zuiderzee, a shallow bay that opened out into the North Sea. In preparation for today's talk, I learned it would not be possible to follow the same route Nereus took, for in 1985, the Dutch government completed an 18-mile dike that closed that entrance to the North Sea, creating wetlands that would eventually become fields for agriculture. We entered the Baltic Sea through the Kiel Canal. The Kiel Canal is one of the most important artificial waterways in the world. An impressive 61-mile canal, it is the shortest and most convenient way that links the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. Just as a point of comparison, the Panama Canal is about 40 miles long. We found another Nereus in the canal. Homeported in Hamburg, she had been launched in 1957. She stayed in Europe for another 40 years. Then she was sold and taken to Belize, where the new owners began using her to smuggle drugs. Her name was changed several times before being seized by the U.S. Customs and scuttled. The weather didn't settle, and Nereus was yawing heavily. A big storm was expected. White caps, heavy rain, barometer dropping, and wind blowing up to 40 knots an hour. Think of last week's 20-knot winds in San Francisco Bay. Those were pretty tough, too. Much activity and heavy traffic from midnight on. As far north as we were, the northern lights were visible. The sun rose at 3:30 a.m. We could easily see huge tankers, ferries, and fishing boat traffic, as well as a Dutch warship that passed on our port side. We were on our way to Poland. We did not have Polish visas and were concerned about our reception. Pilot, custom and immigration officials, and secret police all came on board as soon as we tied up in Gdynia. Nereus was the first private yacht to enter Poland since the 1944 Warsaw Uprising, 20 years earlier to that month. The officials did not know what to do with us. They were all very polite, but they had to call Warsaw. It took about 5 hours to clear us. To keep track of who was coming and going, armed guards were stationed at both stern and bow. They were thrilled to be offered Coca-Cola and chocolate chip cookies. The administrator asked Dad if he could come on board with his son. Once on board, he asked Dad to take him to the master cabin, where he investigated everything, including the head, and discovered Gillette razor blades in a drawer. He politely asked Dad to gift them to him, which Dad was happy to do. We purchased a few items from a small store, including a Polish flag, to add to the flag collection Dad was building. We also had time to visit the three-masted square-rigged ship, Da Pomeroy, now a museum ship docked close by. When we visited many countries, our doors were open and the curtains in the salon were raised. Poland was the first country that required us to close the curtains and lower the stereo. I remember one couple who came down to the dock to look over Nereus. They noticed her name and hailing port printed in bold gold letters on her stern. In very good English, they told us how impressed they were to read those words because it reinforced their belief that freedom existed. They also wanted to warn us of a forthcoming calamity in California. A large earthquake would come in the not too distant future. San Francisco, along with much of California, would fall into the sea. And they told Dad that he should move the family to Escondido, the only town in the state that would be safe. I had to look up Escondido on the map. So 2 years after we returned to the United States, Dad received a cardboard tube from Bogdan Kaminsky, one of the officials we met in Gdynia. It contained a life-size portrait of the Polish hero, Duke Poniatowski, Marshal of France and Poland during Napoleon's time. What to do with it? We thought about it, but it was left rolled up for many years. Eventually, I contacted the Polish consulate in New York City and asked if they would like to have the restored portrait to hang in their beautiful building on Madison Avenue. They were thrilled. That is where it hangs today. Leaving Gdynia, Nereus headed north-northeast across the Bay of Gdansk and out into the Baltic Sea, passing Lithuania and Latvia. As an aside, I was surprised to read in the newspaper only a couple of months ago that Germany had begun deploying troops in Lithuania as part of a new Lithuanian brigade, quote, to provide deterrence of possible Russian aggression, unquote. It took us 2 days to get to Finland, and now mid-July, as we approached, weather was rough. Nothing new in that department. The Nereus log recorded strong winds accompanying huge northwest swells. We found ourselves in the company of small yachts and many small fishing boats heading to Helsinki for protection from the elements. We wanted to take Nereus to the Soviet Union, but the American embassy in Helsinki advised, quote, "It is not yet custom of the Soviets to travel by private yacht," and we were turned down for a visa. Luckily, with the help of a maritime agent, we were able to secure 2 cabins on a 100-foot ferry named the Boar 2, and that was heading to Leningrad. Mother, John, Mary, and I volunteered immediately. The cabins were neat and tidy. The heavy wire springs and thin mattresses took a while to get used to, and there were no keys to lock the cabin doors. The girls shared one of the cabins, and Brother John settled in the other. We were going to Leningrad. Dad, Brother Bill, and Tom and the crew stayed with Nereus. The Boar 2 was our base for 4 days. Quite a bit of drama surrounded those 4 days. Scenes of suspense that might be found in spy thrillers. For example, we were not listed on the ferry's manifest, nor were two gentlemen who latched on to the four of us as soon as we left Helsinki. One introduced himself as Commander Shapiro. He introduced his companion as Colonel Landrigan. The colonel bragged he was a foreign agent from Venezuela. This is all true. We swapped stories. They told us about their recent visits to Crimea, where after drinking wine, they both became terribly ill and suspected someone had attempted to poison them. Brother John's cabin shared a wall with a noisy engine room. One of our new friends offered to trade cabins, and John happily took him up on it. All seemed well, but Mother woke up in a frenzy that night, convinced that John might be in danger because the cabin had originally been assigned to one of our new friends who had survived a suspected attempt on his life in Crimea. Plus, there were no locks on the doors. As we arrived in the Soviet Union, we were welcomed by signs spaced along Leningrad's Neva River. Printed in perfect English, they read, quote, "Peoples of the world, be vigilant. Expose the plotting of the imperialist warmongers," unquote. As the Boar 2 approached the dock, our new friends insisted that the Nereus 4 stand at a certain spot along the rail so they could take a photo. They whispered they were really trying to take a photo of a, quote, Russian Navy submarine base hidden on an embankment behind us. Our 4 days were filled with tours led by interest guides through gorgeous historical buildings, including the Winter Palace and the Hermitage. After a long day, Mother returned to the Boar 2 for a much-needed rest. Mary and I saw a beautiful production of a new Russian ballet. Seven beauties at the Malay Theater of Opera. Returning to the Boar 2, we stopped in the bar. It wasn't long after that a message was handed over that invited us to take a tour out on the town. Mother dressed quickly. The message was from David Rockefeller. It is now 11 p.m. After a chauffeur tour of nighttime Leningrad, looking for a small cafe where we could just sit and chat, but instead having our chauffeur point out the spot where Rasputin was killed, we were driven to the Astoria Hotel. David Rockefeller and his daughter were guests. Neva was her name, just like the name of the river in Leningrad. David Rockefeller had been invited to the Kremlin by Khrushchev to take part in informal talks about increasing US and Soviet trade. He had 2 Russian escorts with him who had also been a part of the Moscow talks. The 3 of them came to Leningrad to attend a peace conference scheduled in the city. M.I. Kotov, the executive secretary of the Peace Fund Board, was our host. He invited us to come to the main dining room of the Astoria Hotel. It had been cleared of all hotel guests. A long table ran down the center of the room and was set up with tasty assortment of hors d'oeuvres. A large group of festive Russian politicos were there. I think they had been celebrating certainly 1 or 2 other celebration receptions before. There were many, many toasts. The mayor of Leningrad insisted we all sit and join the group, eating tasty zakuska, such as smoked sturgeon caviar, herring, black bread, and butter. Proper Russian etiquette, he explained, was to eat first and then toss your head back while you gulped an ice-cold shot of vodka. No clinking of glasses. That would be very rude. Back to the War II, about 1. I've only one photo of our Russian visit. We were advised not to take cameras ashore because they might be confiscated. This photo was taken from the deck of the War II. You can see Brother John talking with a small group of young men. And you don't see any secret Russian submarine bases behind them either. The young men had followed John from almost the first time we went ashore. We learned shortly thereafter that they were studying English in school and wanted to practice. John was studying Russian in school, so they all had a great time practicing their talents. The board too returned to Helsinki. Dad and the crew had been working on Nereus. As all boat owners know, there is always something that needs attention, whether big or little. It might be unclogging the sump pump, changing the oil on the main engine and 2 generators, dealing with the overheating of the starboard auxiliary. The autopilot was replaced once again. Time to scrape and paint, touch up the pilot house, the forecastle hatch, change the outside reach line, or paint the bottom of the shore boat. Or it might have been time to replace the storm light on the Charlie Noble. Dad and Nereus had left a few days before we returned, and passing west across the Baltic Sea, Nereus stopped at the Åland Islands to visit the windjammer Pomeroy. This beautiful 310-foot four-masted windjammer got Dad's attention because of its similarity to San Francisco three-masted Balclutha. Built 17 years later than our own Balclutha, the Pomeroy has been maintained with few changes to its original plans and is now a museum ship. The 4 of us from the Board 2 had taken the boat train to Turku, a Finnish town but the original capital of Sweden. We met Dad and Nereus there. Turku was the most northern part of our entire trip, over 60 degrees north latitude. That's even further north than the Pribilofs that we went to on the first leg of our trip. Brother John had a special memory of Turku. The younger Nereus crowd had been encouraged to take an old-style Swedish sauna. A must experience, we were told, and we discovered soon what that meant. We were invited into a sauna room. Water was slowly poured over very hot stones. The temperature continually rose and hot steam filled the room until we could hardly breathe anymore and could stand it no longer. We were told to lie on our stomachs. Then we were swatted gently with birch branches. That part of it stung a bit. Finally, we were told to dive into the ice water in the harbor. As you can imagine, we lasted no more than a few seconds before signaling that we needed to be hauled out. Stockholm offered another remarkable boat, the Vasa, a 226-foot warship commissioned by King Gustav II Adolf. The king, a member of the Vasa dynasty, had led the struggle for Sweden's independence from Denmark and was anxious that his country be recognized as a formidable one that could take part in the global exploration of the 17th century. The commission included a specific requirement for the design of the windship, including many decorations, many in gold, and importantly, the installment of 2 rows of bronze cannons on both the port and starboard that would certainly be intimidating to any challenger. After 3 years of incredible work, the beautifully and elaborately appointed Vasa was launched as the king and a large cheering crowd looked on. A few minutes later, she capsized and sank into Stockholm's cold, dark water. Her design was beautiful, but not functional. She was grossly overloaded. As a matter of fact, it was more than 300 years later, in 1956, that serious efforts began to raise her. Her restoration is outstanding, and she remains a popular tourist attraction in Stockholm. The Gotha Canal runs through the heart of Sweden. Over the course of the years, it connected the Baltic Sea and Sweden's west coast by joining a chain of rivers and lakes. 58, that is what I said, 58 locks make it possible to raise a vessel 300 feet and then lower it down to sea level. The locks were all operated manually, and then all on board, hand-on-hand working, and all on board had a hand working with the lockkeeper, opening and closing the lock gates, as well as the shutters that let the water in. Before going through a lock or traveling under a railroad bridge, we had to sound 3 long toots on the whistle and 2 long blasts for the attention of any oncoming vessel. The maximum speed through this 19th century canal was 4.8 miles per hour and took a regular canal boat just 3 days. Nereus was sucking her own water because of her 8-foot draft and was only able to go a little less than 3 knots an hour. It took us 4 days and 17 hours. Dad did a fine job taking Nereus through, even in the sections where the canal is only 46 feet wide. Not a scratch. In those narrow sections, we were even able to jump to the bank and walk or ride along beside Nereus. The weather was pleasant, the sun was out, and we even put on our bathing suits. We were greeted in Oslo by Torvald Karpenes, a generous host whose warm hospitality is unforgettable. He encouraged us to visit popular sites, including the Vigeland Sculpture Gardens. He shared Viking stories and was particularly interested in focusing on great explorers. For example, Leif Erikson, who is credited with being the first Norseman to land on the North American continent. Many tourists are familiar with Thor Heyerdahl and the Kon-Tiki, but Mr. Klaveness told us that the Norwegians hold Fridtjof Nansen, who in the late 1800s designed the Fram at 128 wooden boat. She had both a pointed bow and stern, a round bottom, and a shallow draft. Nansen believed that design would make it possible for her to drift to the North Pole, rather than trying to break through the ice, or worse, getting frozen in the ice. 20 years later, that very same Fram was sailed to the Bay of Whales in Antarctica by another Norwegian hero, Roald Amundsen. Nicknamed the last of the Vikings, he set up his Antarctica base camp for his trek to the South Pole and named it Framheim, home of Fram. Besides the Fram's remarkable design, the wooden construction and freezing cold waters of both the Arctic and Antarctic contributed to her viability. It reminds me of how well the wooden hull of the Vasa had been preserved under the cold Swedish water for more than 300 years. Cold and rainy, Nereus ran into horrible being seas and strong currents as she departed Norway. We stayed strictly on the course marked by the Admiralty charts, which posted additional cautions. One chart cautioned submarine exercise frequently in the areas indicated. A good lookout is to be kept for them when passing through these waters. These charts that I have here are some of the charts we used on the trip, and you can see the notes that the Admiralty sent out on some of them. Continuing south, Nereus called on Honfleur in Normandy. The charming 11th century French town is protected by locks, which are open only twice a day because of the tremendous rise and fall of tides, which could be as much as 25 to 30 feet. Fishing boats stay in the outer harbor, or they might find themselves totally high and dry had they continued to the inner harbor. We happily found a spot in the Vieux Bassin and stayed for 3 days. Nereus took on 1,500 gallons of fresh drinking water in Honfleur, half her capacity. Nereus had an evaporator for making fresh water at sea, but it was still important to take on fresh water when in port. With Gypsett, we sailed from the French coast for the Channel Islands. Strong tides and huge swells made for an uncomfortable ride to Guernsey, the largest of the island. You want to talk about king tides in San Francisco Bay? Think about the Channel Islands that contend with 39-foot tides. All small boats on the Channel Islands have legs because of these terrific tides, which requires them to spend half their time in the sand on tide flats. You may be familiar with another of the Channel Islands named Jersey, the home of the Jersey cow, and its rich milk. I was surprised to learn that besides cows, Jersey was famous because it was the last British territory to be liberated by the Germans after World War II. Incidentally, Nereus was tied up next to a minesweeper when we visited. It reminded me of one of the Admiralty's weekly notices that warned, quote, "A remote risk remains in swept water, even in the channels, due to a few mines which have not yet responded." Dad was getting anxious to return home to San Francisco. It is September. Mary and I left Nereus on the 6th. I returned to Berkeley for my final semester, and the free speech movement was percolating. Cousin Peter Plant joined Nereus in Falmouth and got to experience pitching and rolling in 40-knot winds, as you can see from this chart. Nereus sailed forward with our parents, Tom Riley, and crew, stopping in Dakar and Angola before reaching Cape Verde, the jumping off point across the Atlantic. With fresh provisions, fresh water, oil change, and adding fuel, Nereus' capacity was 7,000 gallons of diesel. Nereus crossed the Atlantic in 9 days to find warm and beautiful time among the Caribbean islands, then through the Panama Canal and up the west coast of Latin America. At last, flying the flag of every country visited, you can see the Polish flag back and a half, and celebrating her return. Nereus was escorted from the Golden Gate Bridge, wore the fireboat salute on December 17th. A large group of friends were waiting for the Nereus at the St. Francis Yacht Club. They got to wait a while longer as customs officials came on board to secure the chickens and ducks and vegetables that needed to be quarantined. Dad was happy to be home for Christmas and shared his thoughts. You cannot sail around the world without taking it wave by wave, ocean by ocean, port by port. It's important to see for yourself how big some of the waves and oceans are. Mother marveled at Dad's ability to handle Nereus. I never cease to be amazed and proud of the way he handles her. It's almost as though he is riding a tricycle. It is incredible. I marvel at Mother's diary, which she kept assiduously, providing so many details included in this presentation. Roxanne spent hours reading the log to compose a day-by-day record of the trip that started in May 1963 and ended in December 1964. Before returning to Japan, he patiently listed details of Nereus' circumnavigation. She was anchored 386 days. Her running mileage in 190 days was 40,530 miles, and her average speed was 8.84 knots. Sam returned to Japan and wrote a thank you letter to Dad in trying English. He married a traditional Japanese lady and explained his bride wished to follow an old Japanese tradition so he had to change his last name to hers. Quote, Nereus, big experience, gave me a big lucky chance, he wrote. Sam was hired as a second mate on a tanker and quickly moved up to chief mate. Tang worked as a cook at Cousin Peter Plant's home in San Francisco. Fred returned to join the U.S. Army, not the Navy. I think I knew somebody. Anyway, he did not join the Navy. He might have had enough of the rolling seas. In a letter he wrote to Dad, quote, I want to thank you for the opportunity to tour the world with you and gain a tremendous amount of experience in mechanical, electrical, and refrigeration maintenance, plus the working knowledge of navigation and small ship handling. It would be impossible for me to enumerate what I had gained as an employee of your yacht, Nereus, and it more than likely will be an experience which I will never be able to duplicate. Here is a picture of Fred playing the banjo in his rare free time. Brother John and Mary were married in 1965 and started a family. Mary is here today, along with their two daughters, Mamie and Alice. And we have another family member here today. John continued his Russian studies and for 17 years taught at York School in Carmel Valley. With his brother-in-law, Bill Riley, he raced wild turkey in the 1/2-ton Nationals in San Francisco in 1977. He sailed in the 1985 Transpac on Stuart Little, a 62-foot Britain Chance centerboard sloop. He continues to sail a 14 Melgas on lakes in Muskoka, Ontario, where they're heading tomorrow from Texas. Brother Bill, Cousin Peter, and Tom returned to the States to pick up their studies briefly before enlisting in the U.S. Navy and before they were drafted. The crew gone, the family dispersed, and having graduated from Cal, Dad asked me to stay on board Nereus while she was tied up at the St. Francis Yacht Club. He did not want her to be vulnerable to theft or damage. One of my roommates from Cal, Elizabeth Turpin, is here tonight with her husband, Dr. Martin Turpin. Liz and I lived on Nereus at the St. Francis Yacht Club while plans were being made for Nereus' sale. Mother and Dad returned to the Seychelles and bought property, including Bagatelle, a 19th century French planter's home, and they plan to spend at least half the year there. Dad listed Nereus with a broker who found David Holmes Jr. of Harry and David Gifton fruit basket fame, looking for just such a yacht to travel with his family. He took her to the Caribbean, where he spent 6 years exploring under tropical skies. After Mr. Holmes sold her, the new owners raised a flag, other than the American one, and removed her from the U.S. Coast Guard registry. It's been impossible to track her. I just hope she didn't end up like the Nereus from Hamburg. We're hopeful that the crew at Latitude 38 magazine can put the word out to help us find her. And if any of you have any leads, please let me know. Before I close, thank yous to all who came tonight, especially Laura Hoover, my daughter, who encourages me to make presentation. She listens to readouts and always makes meaningful edits. Steve Aykroyd, who's always generous with his time and talents to help me with the slide deck and the speaker series. And the Sausalito Yacht Club for an opportunity to share this chapter of the Nereus story. And finally, the answer to Ken Jennings' Jeopardy question. The Barents Sea is the name of the sea which separates Russia and Norway. Thank you all.
Hi, I'm Mark Watson, the membership chair here, and people often ask me why I'm a member here. It's things like this. And of course, the tinkling of the ivory. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions I might be able to answer?
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure, again, I say it's been a pleasure for me to share this story because it was so much fun, historically going back 60 years and then fitting into what's happened in the next 60 years.
Thank you very much. Sorry I wasn't talking much.
I wish I was born in this family. Jeez. What a fun life you have here. Thank you very much, Pinky Pomeroy. We really appreciate your talk tonight. And next week, next month, we're having Jennifer Hinkle speak about cancer sailing and living to the limit. It's about my personal experience with cancer and what led me to start Resilience Racing Cancer Survivor Sailing Team. This trophy over here in the corner, she brought back from Cow's Week. So please come next time, July 17th, I think is. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.